things should be changing. Change is good. New technology, new thinking. At least you should be re-examining what you do to make sure that what you're doing is still relevant.
Firstly, congratulations on your appointment.
Thank you, Janet.
What does this new role as Jamaica's ambassador to the U.S. and permanent representative to the OAS mean to you personally and professionally?
Well, it's a new phase. I've been a public servant now for 41 years, mainly military. And then, as you know, I was the National Security Advisor for a while, set up that office, then moved as Commissioner of Police for 6 years. And now it's another pivot. There are things that relate to both, like you do a lot of defense diplomacy as Chief of Defense, lots of work with other countries and other militaries and so on. So it's not something you're totally unfamiliar with. But of course, this is a new phase. This is diplomacy as the central theme, and it's an honor to represent your country in this way.
Thank you. What would you say inspired you, though, to accept this new call to serve Jamaica on the international scene at this stage in your career?
Well, you know, it's as I say, it's another stage, and so service is what I do. You know, as I say, I've been a public servant. I still see myself very much as that, and I believe I can bring something to the environment. I wouldn't say a challenging environment, but certainly it's not a settled environment.
You have been in the JDF, you have been in the JCF for many years.
Yes.
When was it that you realized that you wanted to enter this field?
As a youngster, I knew I'd be in one of those organizations, whether it's the military or law enforcement or something like that. I knew I'd be in that since I was very young.
Did you have a family member whose footsteps you followed in?
Well, my father was one of those Jamaicans who went up to the UK, and then he was in the Royal Air Force for a little while, part of that service that he was giving before he left, and then went on to other things. But so he had that in him as well, and he was very much an adventurer, and so he kind of grew me up the same way. That you seek the adventure. He was a man who was very good with his hands. He could do things, he could make things, and he had a practical sense about how to get things done. And I believe that he transmitted that to me as a very small child. He would teach me things that perhaps other kids weren't learning. And so that, you know, we're all the sum of our experiences and our upbringing, and I guess that led me to this direction. So,
how long you spent in the JDF before transitioning to the JCF? And
right.
I know that you were involved in a lot of transformative projects. Talk to me about those projects that you worked on.
Okay, so I was in the JDF for 34 years. The last 6 of which was as Chief of Defense. Before that, for about 2 years, I think prior, I was the Deputy Chief to General Saunders when he was the Chief of Defense. And as Chief of Defense, I took over within probably a few months, 3 months after the May 2010 operation. So I took over the JDF perhaps after it had done its largest operation that it had ever done.
Right.
And then dealt with all of the things that came after that. And by the 2012 or so, 2011, discussions were coming up around, you know, what does the JDF do? Should we merge with the police to get better outcomes on both sides?
Right, right.
It was important that we changed how we communicated with the public. And so following that stint as Chief of Defense, in 2016, I transitioned to becoming the National Security Advisor. As National Security Advisor, I had to set up this office that is the Secretariat for the National Security Council, but also in November 2016, Jamaica signed an IMF standby agreement that had security benchmarks attached to it. So for the first time, the IMF had done something like this, where security and development were linked, and we had signed this agreement. So we had our security goals as part of what is usually just a financial document. So the government needed someone to make sure that we hit these benchmarks. And so I left the job as CDS, became the National Security Advisor, and that was the first thing on my plate, to hit those security benchmarks so we wouldn't default on our standby agreement, and we hit them. So we set up the office very quickly. We hit those benchmarks, and then we also were looking at the security environment as a whole, how we manage the violence that was increasing and had been increasing from 2015, 2016, and it seemed like there was no end in sight to this. And so we looked at the legislation to create the zones of special operations, and we started looking at that in February 2017, and by September of that year we actually deployed the first people. So we went through the entire legislative cycle and got people deployed within, what's that, 6-7 months, which is actually quite, it just took a lot of very focused work to get that done. And that is really just a way of twinning your security work with interventions in communities. And people are very familiar with it now. Mm-hmm. But it had been done before. We had done it back in, I think it was 2003, where we had done a similar type thing in Hannahtown and Denhamtown, and the police had done it similarly in Painland. And it had yielded good results. What caused it to come to an end was that the social component never kept up. Mm-hmm. But then there was no need to keep it up. In other words, there's nothing that determined that it had to keep up. The new model, which was the zones of special operations, had in the law itself a requirement to do that social thing. So you bound it in law to do the social part of that security work.
Would you say that that is one of the things that you are proud of as Commissioner of Police? The zones of special operations? Would you say that was a success?
Well, I would say, well, we certainly, I mean, the numbers are the numbers. There are less people being killed. There were less people being killed in those areas. And it just put the notion of a holistic approach to security, crime, violence on the table, brought it front and center. But if I just jump back a little bit, as you say, you had asked me if over the years, my time, what was done in the JDF particularly. Well, I mean, we had to move the JDF from where it sat behind walls and behind closed doors to a more transparent model of the military. You had to modernize in that way, the thinking that you're doing all this work, and the JDF does a lot of work and has been. Sometimes you hear people say that the JDF needs to come out of barracks and go and do things on the road. Well, the JDF came out of barracks in 1976 and never went back. So my first days as a young officer back in 84, 85, were on the road supporting the police, just like we do now. So it's not a new thing, and it's an ongoing thing. It's just whether your public and your people know. We had to move from behind the wall to in front of the wall.
Why was that so critical, though?
Because it, you know, things had changed. You're going from a day where you get information if you listen to the 7 o'clock news and you read the newspaper, the Gleaner, but also the Herald at one time and Daily News and so on, to an era where you had Facebook. I mean, now when we look back at Facebook, it's kind of yesterday's technology, but the truth is, you have now moved to this platform that in Jamaica had a 30% reach, way beyond any talk show, way beyond any other media. Probably as I say, probably the Gleaner had the largest reach, but all of a sudden you have this social media at its infancy, really, compared to now. So it created an opportunity to engage. It was important that that be done. And so people became more aware. And it also meant that I had to bring in people into the circle. So businessmen, persons who are clergy, and so on, they had to come in to see that, yeah, okay, this is what we actually do, this is what you have, this is your force. And so what I did was just a little shift in the brand, created a different energy around it, a different way people saw it. So what we did was move from Jamaica Defense Force and kind of brand it Jamaica's Defense Force. That's apostrophe S. The difference is that you now have ownership. Jamaica owns this force, and the force is there for Jamaica. It means that whatever investment takes place in the force is not for the force, it's for the people. So this idea of Jamaica's Defense Force, it means that a soldier who is traveling on the road and sees somebody in difficulties cannot pass, because you have a relationship and ownership. And people who see the force, all of a sudden the force is their force. It must look good. It must be capable, and so on. So that's the branding. But the reality is you have to make it more capable, actually capable, more lethal, but more controlled. We had to redefine how we managed operations. We moved from an operations center that was very analog, very manual. You have a duty officer, you have a signaler, somebody who gets on the radio, and you have a clerk. Basically, that's your up staff. You bring in a couple of people if you have a specific operation being done or event, to a joint information operations center, which had an establishment of 60 plus people where you could monitor. You could do everything in that center, including track diseases moving across the Caribbean. So we created algorithms in this operations center that predicted when chikungunya would reach Jamaica.
The Jamaica Defense Force?
The Jamaica Defense Force. The Jamaica Defense Force is a very comprehensive organization that looks at any threat to Jamaica and its interests.
Including health and wellness.
We look at anything. So the point is that we have the capacity to track things, we have the technology, we have the smarts to do, to look to an algorithm, which is a mathematical construct, to see when we were out by about a day, and we were coming from 3 months out, looking at the spread of this disease across the Caribbean. So not to mention, obviously, what we do to support the police from the Defense Force side, how we monitor our own people, how you see every flight coming through Jamaica's flight information region from an operations center. You have different watches, things that look at um, what's happening at sea, you know, cargo that's coming in. So you basically, your picture, your common operating picture means that you're operating with information, with knowledge and so on. So that's one of the things we created whilst I was CDS, and moved the force technologically down, and also started to look outwards more in terms of our training. Traditionally we've sent our people on training all over the world. It's the best training institutions, but we had to build our own capacity and repatriate that level of training, that quality training to Jamaica. We don't have enough, we're not big enough to support these schools to make it worthwhile for us alone. So we created Caribbean entities. And then we were getting students from as far as the African continent, in South America, from North America and so on our courses. We worked with Chile and Canada and Jamaica to train Guatemalan pilots here in Jamaica and so on. So it's a whole thing. I mean, any one of these things is a whole thing. But I think the fundamental thing is that you are unwilling, or certainly I am, unwilling to just settle that things have to be how they were or are. Things should be changing. Change is good. New technology, new thinking. At least you should be re-examining what you do to make sure that what you're doing is still relevant. So don't get stuck. And also the people who work for you, it's not just to come and do your job. Yeah, that's all you get paid for. That's it. That's the beginning. What you need to do is how you're going to move things from where they are to some new, better position. It doesn't matter what you're doing. You can move things, you can do your job, you can come, you clear the tray. Or you go and do what you're told and then you come back and what it is. Or you can make a difference.
You have taken on a new role.
Yes.
You're about to represent Jamaica as our ambassador to the United States of America. How do you feel about this new role?
Certainly, it's a new adventure. It's a great way to serve, I believe. We have a large diaspora in the U.S., over 1 million persons, who identify as Jamaicans, who believe, you know, even if they have a whole life that doesn't really intersect with Jamaica per se, but there's something about them that they see themselves as Jamaican. And then you have, of course, the diaspora who are dead set Jamaican, you know, and so on. So I'm going over there in a time where there's certainly some uncertainty, some worries, some concerns among the diaspora. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I have to engage them to get more detail on what those concerns are and see how we can work with the U.S. government to allay some of those concerns, mm-hmm. but also to work with the government that I'm being sent to be the ambassador to, so that we can both countries can meet, you know, our own goals out of this relationship that we have. Mm-hmm. I believe Jamaica is well positioned. We're moving ahead. We have, you know, as you say, most of our metrics that you could consider are going in the right direction. You know, economic metrics, we know that have been going for many years. Now our security metrics are going in the right direction. But there are always new threats. And obviously over a long career, I've developed many relationships with U.S. counterparts, mm-hmm. done a lot of work with agencies and, you know, organizations within the U.S., particularly on the security and intelligence side. So obviously I'll renew those and strengthen those. But also I've been, as I prepared to go, I have been engaging a lot of entities on the economic side of things, because that is so critical in this environment where, you know, we're talking about tariffs, we're talking about changes to things that were established norms. But when you have change and big change, there's always big opportunity. And so I see one of my roles is to how do I leverage the opportunities that arise in the interests of Jamaica and our diaspora.
I want you to talk to me about the role that you've played with the rest of the Caribbean.
Yes.
And how you may have helped them with their security issues as well.
Okay, so I guess the main part of that was through the decision by the CARICOM heads to host Cricket World Cup 2007. That decision was made, and a few years before, normally these things, you win the bid to host something like that a few years before. So it was to start the end of February 2007.
Right.
By mid-2006, the region was behind. The region hadn't done the necessary security-related planning to deliver that. So there are two things that run concurrently. One is the Cricket World Cup organization that does the planning at the stadiums, deals with private security around the stadiums, although that the private side of that and so on, deal with the games specifically. But to host international events, there is a whole security environment you have to create in the country to be able to host that. And not largely, big countries spend a lot of money doing this to host, whether it's a Cricket World Cup, Olympics, any large games, because you're talking about hotels, shopping areas, fans, VIPs, and so on. The unique thing about cricket at the time was that I believe most of the countries that were involved in cricket were also involved in a war on terror. So they were actually targets for terrorist organizations as well. And so that added a layer of complexity to what they were doing. The long and short of it, though, is that in summer of 2006, late summer, I was called by the then Chief of Defense Staff, who was Admiral Lewin, and General Saunders, who was his deputy, de facto deputy, Colonel General of Staff, and say that I need to go to the Eastern Caribbean and assist with developing or create the security plans to deliver this security around Cricket World Cup in a few months. So this is now about 8 months, 7 months out from start time. Normally you do these things in a few years. So I went down there, we got together a multinational team that I was leading, created an organization called the Caribbean Operations Planning and Coordinating Staff, where we'd sit down and plan all the operations. Now, the operations are not just land operations, it's sea operations, air operations, because you have to now move people from island to island, because games are being hosted in different places, and they're on a schedule, and you have to move everything and the security arrangements from island to island. Some of the islands, of course, have less capacity. They just don't have big police forces, big militaries, and so on. So there were 9 countries involved. Jamaica and Trinidad took care of themselves, and I did the other 7. I worked with the local governments and police forces and so on. So we did a lot of planning, assisted countries to do their national plans. Some places hadn't done that before, and worked with those to get them ready. It was non-stop. It was day and night without break. We had no time, but we had a good team. And we brought in people, not as many as we needed, but enough with a dedicated team that we could get the thing done. When we were going to go live on it, but I tell you, little anecdote. It's a big logistics exercise. It's a logistics of security to get police, military, and those, because we're playing matches in 2 islands simultaneously. So you have to have security presence at both of those countries, and then they'd both move, and you'd have to move that security presence as well to another country. So everything has to move within a day or 2. So it became a very so the planning around the flights, so we were using Caribbean Star, Caribbean Sun, Air Jamaica, BWIA as the main ones, and Ret'd as the main airlines, and booking and work through all those details. It was going well. In December of 2006, November, December 2006, Caribbean Star disappeared as an airline. It shut down. Caribbean Sun shut down. BWI shut down. All of these became non-existent. So all of the plans were to naught. Fortunately, BWI became Caribbean Airlines and opened back up in January. But the others were gone. So we had to redo the planning. And so I had to get in touch with, I call in favors. Fortunately, as a military person, you have connections all over. You know, so we got people, we got lift out of Brazil, out of Colombia, I believe, and so on, and Air Jamaica stepped up, and we had to redo the whole thing, and we're going live in 2 months, in a month. So the team had Christmas Day off. That was it. Boxing Day back at work, because that's what was that was the requirement. Eventually, we put together a security team. So after we did the planning, then they made me the commander. So I must execute this now. So I was executing across these countries. I was leading that. We had about 800 people who were specialists for counterterrorism, specialists on chemical, radiological, biological, and nuclear attacks, experts on, sniper teams or sharpshooters, just a gamut of experts in various security areas. And I had them they came from 15 countries and spoke 5 languages. And we made them into one team called the CARICOM team. Massive group out of South Africa. South Africa carried a whole Airbus load of specialists, bomb dogs. Out of India, India has 6 teams, they call them Black Cat units, who do bomb disposal. 2 move with the president, then 4 of them do work. Kashmir, of course, is a big one where they have IEDs and so on. They lent us 2 to do. So I had 2 of those teams.
2 aircraft?
No,
or
2 of those
teams.
teams,
Right.
out of the 6 that India has to support what we're doing. And so we pulled together this team and delivered that. It meant that I had to brief 7 cabinets, 7 prime ministers. I spent about 11 months speaking and moving and with Prime Minister Motley, now Mia Motley, then a minister leading on this issue. And so I worked directly for her for about 11 months. And Patrick Manning, he was the lead prime minister. What that did was give me a very good insight and appreciation for the concerns and thoughts of the political class, which as a military officer, police officer, you don't really get that till you get up to the point of being CDS, Commissioner of Police. Then you actually do that political interface. But it allowed me early on to be briefing cabinets and speaking with ministers and presenting budgets to prime ministers and so on. So that at the same, so it was hard, but it was a great learning experience for me and prepared me. By the time I became Chief of Defense, it prepared me for that. I had been in that world for years. I was very comfortable doing that. And then that plus CDS became National Security Advisor, where I'm dealing with economic issues, development issues, and getting into the heart of policy level and creating policy. And then you add those three things, and I became Commissioner of Police. So all of those things prepared me to do my role as Commissioner of Police. And I believe that all of that experience is what prepares me to go and do my new role in Washington, D.C.
Yes, as a diplomat.
Yes. So we all are a, what do you call it, a collection of our experiences. And I believe that mine have prepared me to do most things.